Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I think I've got about an hour to do my talk. And what I want to do is that I want to split it into four sections. The first section is that I want to tell you a bit about my background. The second section really is to talk about how I developed my Black Farmer brand. The third is really about what opportunities there are in terms of this age of diversity. And finally, a question and answer session, so everybody feel comfortable to ask whatever questions you want to ask. So let me go right back to the beginning with my story. I was actually born in Jamaica, and I was born in a place called Clarendon, Frankfield. And if you went there today, you would see quite a lot of subsistence farmers working the land. And so I'm from a very rural background. What a lot of people do not know is that during the 50s, when people like my parents had a chance to come to this country, they were part of the Windrush generation. They came from rural backgrounds. And they had a real sense of how to work in rural backgrounds. But the opportunities when they came to this country was in the cities and the towns and not in the rural communities. What I always say to people is this, is that you have to be quite entrepreneurial to leave your country of origin, to leave everything that you're familiar with, leave all that behind you, to go somewhere else, not only to create opportunities for yourself, but that of your children. So entrepreneurialism is very much part of my DNA, as it were. And what I'm going to be talking about throughout this session is the key thing about being entrepreneurial is to have the thinking of the outsider. It's the outsider that changes the status quo. And some of the questions you have to ask yourself is that, do you have that mental capacity to think outside the box? In my parents' case, they decided to move to Birmingham. And before I actually say this bit here, is anybody in this audience from Birmingham? Ah, shit. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to apologize for what I'm about to say about Birmingham, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a bit of a shithole, basically. Especially the part of Birmingham that I'm from. I'm from a place called Small Heath, and you will know what Small Heath is like. It's one of those places that is awful. It's derived of hope. I regard it as being a society's despot heap. They don't really expect people to do much who have been brought up in that area. And if truth be known, most of the people that I went to school with ended up in prison, and they really didn't do much with their lives. I'm from a family of 11. I've got 8 brothers and sisters. I'm the oldest boy, and we were very, very poor, very, very poor. My mother, and this is true, used to have to try and feed all 11 of us with one chicken. And even to this day, I have a real fetish for chicken bones because we had to try and get every bit of nutrition out of this chicken. Now, as a way of subsidizing the family income, my father had an allotment. And as the oldest boy, it was my responsibility to look after this allotment. And this allotment really became my oasis away from the misery that I was surrounded by. And this is the important part of my story. And when I go around the country and I tell my story, I emphasize this bit, because you cannot achieve anything in life unless you are prepared to have what I'm about to tell you. I can remember at the age of 11, I was 11 years old, and I made myself a promise that one day I would like to own my own farm. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but it was a promise that I lodged into the back of my mind, and everything that I subsequently did was to get into the position to buy this farm. I'm going to tell you how I did it, but the most important thing I tell people is this. You cannot expect to achieve anything unless you are prepared to have the courage to dream. One of the things about being English is that we tend to poo-poo the idea of a dream. It's very much an Americanism. But if you're not prepared to put it out there and shout out the dream that you would like to have, it will never, ever come your way. And it was because I was prepared to do that, that is how my dream came true. Now, I'm old enough, probably some of you in this audience might remember, the school I went to in Birmingham was called Secondary Moderns. It was a secondary modern school. And this school was as much of a shithole of the place that I sort of lived in. The kids hated being there. The teachers hated being there. They didn't really educate us. They policed us. It was something they had to do by law, but there was no expectation that we would do well. And to make it even worse, I am dyslexic. And in those days, and even now today, people have absolutely no understanding of what dyslexia is. And so at 16, I left school and I could hardly read and write. And my headmaster felt that I was the sort of guy that would end up in prison. Now, if you're as thick as shit at 16, there's not many options left for you. So the only option I had, because I wanted to get away from home, was to join the army. Now, entrepreneurialism and army does not go together. The whole thing about being in the army is that you're there to follow rules. You've got to be a team player. The thing about being an entrepreneur is that you challenge convention. If somebody says something can't be done, that is one of the things that challenges you to try and make it happen. So as you could see, that personality of mine of being entrepreneur and the army just did not mix. So they spent about a year trying to lick me into shape, and after a year they gave up. So I got chucked out of the army. So I have a dishonorable discharge to my name. And you could see at the age of 18, everything that everybody was predicting would be happening to me, I seemed to be on course for that to happen. So having been kicked out of the army is, what the hell am I going to do now? And believe it or not, actually, and when I tell young people this now, they don't believe it. In those days, if you were a failure at everything, there was only then one option available to you, and that option was catering. Most stupid people who were thought to be rubbish and useless, they thought, well, they can't do anything else, chuck them into catering. So I went to the local catering college in the West Midlands, and luckily, I absolutely loved it. I loved working in catering. And I didn't work in anywhere glamorous. It was sort of hamburger joints and all those sort of places. And I did that for a couple of years. And again, this is a significant point in my life. Because as much as I enjoyed being a chef, the promise that I'd made to myself at the age of 11 to own my own farm was a constant nag. It was constantly saying to me, well, boy, if you want to get a farm, it ain't never going to happen with you flipping burgers. You're going to have to try and earn some serious money to be able to buy a little piece of land. So, at that time, there used to be a very popular BBC documentary series on called 40 Minutes. They made social documentaries. I used to love that series. And I thought, right, I want to get a job working in television as a producer-director. Now, all of my family and friends said, this guy's fucking nuts, basically. He could hardly read and write. Television is very, very much the profession for the Oxbridge type. This guy is off his rocker. Now, I have lived my life on these two principles. And anybody who has achieved anything in life have got these two principles. I believe it doesn't matter on your background, it doesn't matter on your education, your sex, where you're from. Any successful person will have these two things. You just look at any successful person and you'll see it. And that's all you need to achieve anything that you want in life. The first thing is that you need to be absolutely ruthlessly focused. And what I mean by ruthlessly focused is that you're able to get rid of the white noise of living. You will be amazed how your life is full of rubbish, things that are not relevant. And there are twice in my life I've got to a point where I realize that actually life is full of rubbish. One is when I nearly died with cancer. I had leukemia. And there's nothing that actually helps you to focus what really matters in life. And very, very few things matter. Any successful athlete, they'll be getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to train. They'll be ruthlessly focused. That is the first thing. The second thing, and this is what I regard to be the most important thing, is that you need to have passion. And the reason why I say passion is passion defies reason, it defies logic, it helps you get over all of the hurdles that life will throw at you. And everybody in this room will know what I mean when I talk about passion. Remember when you first fell in love. Some of you may still be in love. That just, people look at you doing things, say, this person is crazy. They are so driven by everything that seems to be irrational. That is the key for entrepreneurialism. There is just something about the person that drives them that reason and logic does not make sense. So you need to have focus and you need to have passion. They're not great, wonderful things. We all have those within us. It's to be able to see they are vital to achieve anything that you want. So my focus was to try and become a producer director in the BBC. So I took focus and I took passion. I wrote to everybody you could think of in television. Nobody answered my letters. I rang them. Nobody would take my calls. I decided that I would go and work with the security guards for nothing, the security guards at BBC Pebble Mill at the time, and just help lift the barriers up and down to let the vehicles out of the building, just so I could get close to the building. I did that for about a year. I then, from that, got a job as a cleaner. I got a job as a cleaner so I could get into the offices to help them clean their offices. And then after 2 years, this is what happened. I was introduced to a guy, and I still remember his name now, and it happened some 30, 40 years ago. I was introduced to a guy called Jock Gallagher. And he took me into his office, and he spoke to me for about an hour. And he says, look, you are not the sort of person, we employ in television because A, you got a bit of an attitude problem, and B, you just don't have the qualifications. And he said this is something, he said, I might live to regret, he may live to regret, but I'm going to take a chance with you and give you a job as just a general runner for 3 months and to see what happens. Now that man, having the courage to give me that break, then started a really long career in television. And one of the things I say to young people is this. The other thing about achieving your goals is to find your guardian angels. Everything that I have ever achieved, somebody has gone out of their way, put themselves on the line to give me an opportunity. I would never, ever have achieved the things I've achieved in life if somebody hadn't done that. And they're out there. The trick in life is to find and spot those people. So I started as a runner. I went off, and now runners doing all the shit jobs you could think of, but I was so glad to at least get my foot up on the ladder. I went from a runner to becoming a researcher, and then I went on to eventually become a producer-director. Now, some of you are probably old enough in this audience to probably remember a program called the Food and Drink Program with Julie Goulden and Ross Clark. Anybody remember that? That was a program that I produced. I traveled the world making programs about food and drink. And I want to pause here for a second because it's a massive leap. You've got this guy from the gutter suddenly working in somewhere like the BBC, traveling the world making food programs. My boss at the time, a guy called Peter Bazalgette, it was my job to break in all the big name celebrity chefs, people like Gordon Ramsay. I gave him his first break in television, James Martin, Jamie Oliver, you name them. Because these guys were tough men in their kitchen, a lot of the Oxbridge types couldn't manage them because these chefs are the sort of guys that would take you outside to sort a problem out. And my boss knew that I was the sort of person that would oblige. And you know, we spoke the same sort of language. And so I was able to manage and handle these people well. So I spent 15 years at the BBC. And you would think that from my background, I would be grateful. I'd keep my head down and just think, boy, you know, you've done pretty well, settle down and count your blessings. But my biggest belief in life is this, is that the moment you stand still, life will go right past you. And that is the most difficult thing people have to come to terms with. Most people live in what I call survival mode. And survival mode is when you believe that everything that happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow. And one of the big things about this conference, about diversification, it's a demonstration that our industry is changing. And those people who are able to adapt are the ones who are going to achieve out of it. Those who stand still will become a victim of change. And so it's really, really important never, ever to stand still. And so, again, and this is why you need to have a vision. As much as I love the BBC, and the BBC was a very, very glamorous profession, the dream that I had as an 11-year-old kid was always there, always present to say, well, boy, if you want to get this farm, you need to get your act together. And that's why you need to have something to aim for. So I was getting on now. I mean, I was getting to my late 30s. And I just thought, well, if I don't do something, I'm going to miss this opportunity. And the one thing I do not want to do is to spend my life in regret. So I decided that I was going to leave the BBC. All I had was enough money to pay my mortgage for 3 months. Nothing else, no money from anywhere else. All I had was enough money to pay my mortgage for 3 months. And there is nothing that focuses my mind more than knowing that you're going to be running out of money pretty quickly. But the key thing is this. Most people you meet would love to be doing something different to what they're doing now. And the thing that stops them from doing that is fear. You'd be amazed how fear holds so many people prisoner to become the type of person that lives in survival mode. And you will know when you're not living in survival mode because you're able to live with fear. And it is pretty difficult, but that is what you have to do, is how do you make a friend of uncertainty rather than to believe that certainty is around the corner. A whole society, this massive Brexit debate, take Brexit out of it, and it's a fight between certainty and uncertainty. The trouble about politics is that it's promising people certainty. The only thing that is certain in this life is that certainty does not exist. And therefore, the one thing that you can do is prepare yourself mentally that you could adapt to change. If you've got the right mental attitude, it doesn't matter what life throws at you because you're prepared for it. People get really wounded and damaged when they believed their job is going to be around for a long time. You see people when they get made redundant, how it really knocks them to pieces because they had a belief that certainty was going to be there forever. It does not exist. You've got to get that mental attitude to live with uncertainty. So, I decided that I really had to go for it, and I decided that I will leave the BBC and I will set up my own food and drink marketing agency. And the reason I decided to do a marketing agency is because I'd obviously started as a chef. I worked in television on food programs, and therefore being able to market food and drink brands seemed to be the logical step. And I worked my socks off 24 hours a day. You'll know when you are doing the right thing. You'll know when you are being driven because you do not live like everybody else. I'm absolutely amazed when I meet people and they talk about being entrepreneurial. If you're entrepreneurial, you're not like normal people. You do not have the benefits of normal people. Most of you are in farming. Your lives are not like normal people. You have to work around the seasons. You have to be able to adapt. So in a sense, you've all got the vital elements you need to be entrepreneurial because your lives are not normal. People who could decide to go off on holiday or do things without actually thinking of the consequences. What I know about farming is that actually that doesn't work like that. So you have the capacity to have to adapt to circumstances. It's about how to use it in a greater way than you actually do at the moment. So I started off very small. I launched brands like Lloyd Grocery Sauces, Kettle Chips, Plymouth Gin. They're big brands now, but back in the day, they were just start-up and developing brands. And one of the reasons why people used to come to me to do their marketing is they wanted someone that was going to think outside the box. And when you're small, and when you don't have much money, you have to think outside the box and you have to be able to punch above your weight. And what you will notice about my story is about having the sheer audacity. And I give you something like this. If you go into a classroom and you ask a group of 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, who's the best football player in that classroom? All of them will put their hands up. Go back to that same classroom at the age of 8 and ask the same question, they'll all point to one person. They have been conditioned by that age, conditioned to get rid of the audacity. The audacity to be whatever you want to be. And our society tries to drag people down who are audacious. Think of our response when somebody says, they're going to go there. People think, whoa, who does he think he is? There is something about our culture that drags people down from having audacity. But audacity is the very thing you need to achieve your dreams. And you could only have audacity if you're prepared to be a beer. Now I say this, you have to decide in life whether you want to be or whether you want to belong. Belongers have to abide by the rules of the team, the community, the society. Beers are prepared to ignore the rules of the group and say, I'm going to do this regardless of the consequences. And I'll give you a simple example. Let's say a young kid is gay and he knows that his mom and dad will object to it. He will have a choice. He either keeps his sexuality a secret, so he belongs to that community, or he sacrifices the fact that he might be dismissed by them to be. And in any great thing and any great steps you make in life, you'll ultimately have to make that choice, to be or to belong. So I ran my marketing agency for 14 years. And that gave me the money to buy my farm. I say to young people this: dream early, because it takes a fucking long time to achieve your goddamn dreams. It takes a hell of a long time. What happens in our sort of instant culture is people want things to happen instantly. What you have to do is that you've got to put yourself in for the marathon. It is long term. And actually, it isn't how great the idea is. It's about, actually, does the individual have the tenacity to keep going, to keep going? It's a marathon. And as things are being thrown at you to try and knock you off course, it's about the ability just to keep going. That is the most important thing. Right. I'm going to show you some pictures of my farm. Let me just flick there. So my farm is in the southwest. On to the next one. And then you could see my farm was an old dairy farm, and this is my next door neighbor, Chris. He's the actual farmer. He's had sort of generation of dairy farmers. On to the next one. And you could see it's just on the Devon-Cornwall border. And the next one, that's it. We can stop there. So I used to go down to the southwest quite a lot on holiday, and I liked it down there, so I said, right, I'm going to buy a farm. And this was about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And at the time, the industry was going through another one of its problems where a lot of farmers was giving up, couldn't get the right price. It was a bloody mess. And so what I found when I bought this farm was that there was this massive gulf between urban Britain and rural Britain. I can remember when I used to talk to my friends up country in London, and they were amazed. I think, what the hell are you doing going down to this primitive part of Britain to buy a farm? You know, don't they lynch black people up there? Aren't they a bit racist and all that sort of stuff? And then when I was in Devon, they used to think that, well, what's a fucking black guy coming down to farm for? Anybody with any sense would be trying to get out of it. And that they thought, is he coming down here to grow drugs or something like that? So people have all these different sort of stereotypes of what people's intentions are. But as the outsider, I saw an opportunity. And I just thought, wow, this is really interesting here. If you go to on the continent, you'll see that there's a greater linkage between urban and rural, that the urbanites on the continent like the connection they have with their farming community, far more supportive. But it's as though you're living in two different countries in the UK. So I thought, right, I am going to create a brand that is going to absolutely challenge the whole perception of what Britain is, about what a farmer is. I'm going to do something that is going to be really ballsy and very different. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that I wanted to do something that was really different. Now, for any of you who are thinking about creating your business and creating your brand, the biggest mistake that most people make is they put all of their time and effort in coming up with a fantastic product. They will bore you to death of how brilliant this product is. And no doubt it is wonderful, but that is the mistake. People do not buy what you do. Listen to what I've just said. People do not buy what you do. They expect what you do to be fantastic. What they buy is what you stand for. When you know what you stand for, you could then sell anything. And an example of that would be Richard Branson and the Virgin brand. So that's why he could do airplanes, he could do records, he could do anything, because people are buying into what that Virgin brand means to them. And great brands, that's what they do, is that they have a philosophy. They create a belief system that people buy into that. And that is the key thing to do. So I decided, right, I'm in food, so I'm going to do a food product. And I thought, well, what's quintessentially British? And I thought, well, a sausage is quite British. At the time, You know, there are hundreds of sausages out there. Everybody will tell you that their sausages are fantastic. And I said, right, what is it that I could do a bit different? And I did a bit of research, and the research said, actually, 1 in 100 people have some sort of wheat intolerance. So I thought, okay, fine, that's a gap. There's a little tiny gap there. I will do a gluten-free sausage. It will also be high meat content, so that's the reason I went down that route. And I'm going to tell you something about research in a moment, which is really, really important. So I decided I was going to do a sausage, and I thought, right, I'm going to try and find a manufacturer who will make it to my spec, and then I could focus on what I do best, which is sales and marketing. So having come up with the product, the next thing was to come up with a brand name. And I was scratching my head thinking, what the hell am I going to call this brand? And one day it came to me. All of my next door neighbors down in Devon used to call me the Black Farmer. And I thought, shit, you know, that's a pretty good brand name. Not only is it a good brand name, but it's no one else out there could nick the idea. Not only could they not nick the idea, but it has an edge to it. People are not too sure about whether it's politically correct or not, whether you could say it. There is, well, can you say that? Now, that is the key about how do you get people to do what I call that double take moment. Can you say that? Is that all right? Are they black farmers? It starts to build questions in their heads. And what I wanted to do was copy exactly what Richard Branson did with the Virgin brand. I remember as a kid, when that brand was launched, using the word virgin in public was a very risque thing to do. So again, a lot of the efforts one has to go into building a brand is the marketing. How do you communicate with the consumer? How do you get them to change their habit? If somebody's been used to buying that product all of their lives, what is it you're going to have to do for that person to say that and look at that and then decide to pick that up and become your customer? That's all about understanding how the consumer thinks. And one of the problems we have in our industry, the farming industry, we understand how our bloody animals think. Everybody knows all about and the weathers and the seasons, but not enough effort thinking goes into how does the consumer think. Because if you get that right, you have some powerful people on board. That is a key thing to get right. So I decided to call it the Black Farmer. Before I signed off on that, I thought, right, I'm going to go out and research it. So I sent it out to research about whether you should call the brand the Black Farmer. And all the research came back and says, do not call it the Black Farmer because it will offend people. Now, it taught me a major lesson in life. And you have to understand this if you're ever in this situation. Research will tell you what people are thinking today, but it will not tell you what people are thinking tomorrow. For that, you need vision. You need to have an idea that what you are trying to do, what you are trying to create, people will follow you. In the age we live in, everybody is so driven by data, by research, by evidence. It's a trap. It's a trap because all it's doing is telling you what's happening at the moment. But to build great brands is that you need to have a vision of the future. So I ignored it and I decided to go with my vision. Anyhow, how long have I got? Jesus Christ, I'm rattling on. 5 minutes, okay. I decided, right, I'm going to try and get this into the supermarkets. And everything you've heard about the supermarkets is true. They're bastards, a lot of them. Now, the thing that I learned was this. The only people the supermarkets fear are the consumers. Suppliers, they could get they could get suppliers at all price. If you get trapped as a supplier, they'll eventually stitch you up. What I realized is that their great fear is the consumer. And I launched my brand just at the start of the internet revolution. Twitter didn't exist. Facebook had just started. Before social media, the only way you could get to your customer was through newspapers, TV, advertising, etc. But with social media, it meant you were able to have a direct relationship with the consumer. So when I went to see all the supermarkets and they all said no, I thought, right. I built a website, I put all of their names, telephone numbers, addresses on my website, and I went around the whole country and did a massive, massive sampling program. And when people love the product, I simply say to them this: if you like it, just go onto my website and email the buyer and demand that they list this product. And as God is my witness, that is how we got our listings in the supermarkets, by the consumer. If you get the consumer on your side, they will become your workforce. They will battle for you. I get invited to people's weddings that I've never ever met before because they feel so close to the brand. By spending time and effort with the consumer, they will pay you back in dividends. All too often, people are frightened of that relationship. That relationship takes effort. It takes time. We have a system in my company that every email, every social media thing has to be answered in 2 hours, even at the weekend. Is that it really feeds. It really, really takes up a lot of time and effort. But we are still around 15 years later as a business because we know the absolute importance of the consumer. I'm going to be running out of time here, so I'm just going to finish off. Do you want me to go? 10 minutes for questions. But let me just finish up before I go to questions. Is that one of the reasons I like to come and talk at events like this is because I believe that the farming industry has the opportunity to revolutionize, just like what happened to the catering industry. Back in the day, the catering industry was seen to be the place for people who are irrelevant and dull. And then you have the celebrity chef culture that's made the industry one of the sexiest industry for people to go into. I fundamentally believe there's a fantastic opportunity similar in farming as that happened in catering. We need to change our ways. We need to think and behave differently and actually get rid of the old image that people have of what farmers are. You know, entrepreneurialism is very, very much part of your blood, and therefore we shouldn't be waiting for permission. We should just go out there and have the ability to be audacious. Thank you very much.